The following is an Operation Podcast production.
Helping men become skilled lovers and improve sexual health. Does this mean men are not already skilled lovers?
We don't have a lot of training. So I would say that most people are not born skilled lovers, no.
What's wrong with our sexual health now that it needs to be improved?
Number one, testosterone decline, up to 40% average decline over the last 40 years. There's guys that are having sexual issues that are younger, right? They're having ED type symptoms in
Younger
their
meaning
20s.
what? 20s.
20s. What I have learned is that most men don't have a healthy connection to their own sexual energy. And so just being super understanding and super compassionate as a partner of like, this may never work. My partner may never shift from where they are. And I need to be okay with that. But you got to shoot your shot, which is like, hey, I'd love to explore this with you. Communication, consent, compassion is really big.
If you can't turn on yourself, how can you expect anybody else to?
Hi, I'm Jackson Hightower. I am a men's health and wellness educator, and this is Ever Forward Radio.
If you guys are watching the video, and I hope you are, Jackson is joining me in the brand new studio from Operation Podcast, where
Good.
I'm also calling it the new EF headquarters. I got the little square fancy things on my mics. So
I like it.
Thank you so much for being my guinea pig today, man.
I'm happy to be a guinea pig.
And this episode is going to be going live in June during National Men's Health Awareness Month. So I know a lot of guys tuning in are really going to be curious about what you have to say and what you have kind of made your mission. And that is helping men become skilled lovers and improve sexual health. When I hear that, it first makes me immediately think, does this mean men are not already skilled lovers?
Well, when you think about any practice that you become a master in, right? Any profession, whatever it may be, usually you have some sort of education around it. You have some sort of master that you're working with, some sort of teacher, some sort of program and curriculum. In my experience, and at least that's the sort of how I got started, was that when I was younger, I didn't have anyone to teach me anything about this sort of stuff, right? And I wasn't a skilled lover. And so you learn trial by fire, like sort of figuring it out. It's like walking through, a room with a blindfold on and saying like, try to get to the other side. And you've never been in the room before. We all usually have some sort of training to become a doctor, become a lawyer, whatever it may be. This area in our lives, because of religion, society, propriety, whatever it is, we don't have a lot of training. So I would say that most people are not born skilled lovers, no. And men, especially because we pride ourselves in our capacity to, perform in the bedroom and be good lovers, so to speak. But what are you doing to actually learn those skills, right? Are you learning from a teacher? You're learning from someone who has more experience than you do. Are you taking videos, trainings, workshops, reading books, whatever it may be? Some people don't care about it, but a lot of guys do. And so that's, where I come in.
Improve sexual health.
Yeah.
What's wrong with our sexual health now that it needs to be improved specifically?
Wow. Well, number one, testosterone decline has been a major, major issue. Some studies have said that up to 40% average decline over the last 40 years for the general male population, which means that like my levels now would be 40% less than what they would have been if I was, living in 1980.
I've heard as high as 50.
Yeah. So there's something going on there, and that's a function of environment. It's a function of, plastics. It's a function of what we're spraying on our crops. It's a function of the kind of water that we're drinking. There's a host of issues that go into it, creating what's called phytoestrogen, which is like fake estrogen. So it's like synthetic estrogen that acts like estrogen, but isn't actually the real hormone that basically just saps our bodies. It gets stored in fat cells. And when it's stored in fat cells, so that means if you're obese and you don't have a sedentary lifestyle, you're going to have more of that. And what it does, in like sort of the simplest terms, it sort of caps your ability to produce testosterone properly. So we're getting capped on the testosterone level. And it's just going down, and our environment is just filled with toxic chemicals. That also leads to sperm decline, right? There was an Israeli study that came out a number of months ago, which talked about sperm levels declining for men. I think using like numbers like almost up to like 50%. For where they used to be. And that's because if testosterone's going down, right, you're not going to have as high sperm counts.
Right.
The motility changes, the morphology, which is what the sperm looks like, changes. Sperm need to be aesthetically pleasing, and actually in order to get from point A to point B.
Some guy listening right now is like, all right, I've been trying to train my pecs, my body. I'm trying to get the perfect shape. And you're like, now how do I train my sperm? I want the most aesthetic looking sperm.
I know, it's wild. So how fast they swim. So it's a wild process. And, you look at infertility, and infertility is on the rise. And most people think that infertility is actually only caused by women. That's just not true. They say like up to 30 to 40% of infertility cases are due to low sperm count, low sperm viability, deranged morphology is what they call it when they're not aesthetically pleasing. So you've got that, issue that's happening. And then you also have like, this lifestyle that we live, right? Which we moved more into sort of sedentary lifestyles, fast food. We're, as a culture, at least in America, like much more obesity, right? And again, the trigger is if you're more obese, you're automatically going to have more phytoestrogen in your body. So the key to actually, people ask me like, what's the best way to like increase your T? It's to lose fat. If you're fat in any way, your BMI is over 25, 26, losing fat is the best way to increase it naturally without needing to do anything else, without taking supplements or pharmaceuticals or anything. So there's a couple different things that are happening right now to men. And, you have to look at it from a meta level, right? Like our culture and our society, if men are having less testosterone in their system, testosterone is not evil. Testosterone is literally the most important hormone for men in our bodies. It's what makes us men, but it also helps with a number of other functions, immunity issues, and it also affects our will, our drive, our sort of like zest for life, right? And so you have guys with
virility.
Right? You have guys with sort of, lower T or symptomatically low energy, lethargy, depression, whatever it is. Usually it's because they don't have high T levels. And so as a culture, if that's affecting us en masse, right? Where men are having low T, that's good, and more estrogen in their bodies. Well, if you can extrapolate that, like, how does that affect our behaviors? How does that affect the way we show up in the world as men? So we're seeing a lot of things in the culture right now where, men aren't being men aren't in their masculine, whatever it may be. There's just a lot of interesting things to think about as it relates to like, because again, it's not necessarily men's fault. We're being flooded with chemicals that are making us, our bodies are like, wait a minute, why is there so much estrogen in here? Yeah. Right. And the body doesn't know what's going on. So it affects behaviors, it affects attitudes, it affects how we show up in the world. So there's a lot going on right now with men, and it's tough.
I hear in what you've been describing thus far, kind of like two poles. There's the being a skilled lover, understanding skill sets in the bedroom.
I call it sexual dynamics.
Sexual dynamics, perfect. Of course, you've got a great term for it. There's the sexual dynamic portion, but then there's also the biological portion. Do we need to focus on one before the other? Can we be successful in one without the other?
Yeah. Fantastic question. They're intertwined and they should be worked on at the same time. Some of these things that we teach in the sexual dynamics portion are going to help with the physiological issues that men might have. So what I didn't mention there, I mentioned testosterone, I mentioned sperm quality. There's also erectile dysfunction. There's performance anxiety.
Right. That's probably kind of getting more towards like the end of the spectrum of actual physiological problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, other than just, I'm struggling.
Right. So men can struggle for what I've experienced through like the thousands of DMs that I'm getting, on a weekly basis is there's guys that are having sexual issues that are younger, right? They're having ED type symptoms in
younger
their 20s.
20s,
and like early 30s. Those ED issues, in my estimation and my understanding, are more psychological as it relates to porn. And then the older guys, obviously, as you get older, there's physiological changes that happen in the body, less circulation, less vascularity, that can cause sort of ED issues as it relates to, guys in their 40s and 50s. Both of those issues can be alleviated at some level by learning some of these practices, right, in the sexual dynamics. So they actually go together.
Okay.
Because if you learn, learning how to do Kegels, learning how to do edging, things like that in the sexual dynamics piece.
Guys can do Kegels?
Oh, yeah. It's literally the most important exercise that men should do for their sexual health. And I'm doing it right now. I'm literally doing Kegels. I need
an adult.
So it's super easy to do. It's just, the flow of urine when you stop, the flow of urine, that pulse, that's what a Kegel is. And so doing that exercise, it does three things. And this is science. This is like scientifically proven to help alleviate erectile dysfunction, help alleviate premature ejaculation, and actually help guys last longer. Because if you can control that flow and you're in the moment in that experience and you can sort of slow things down and breathe while controlling that flow, you're able to last longer than you might normally last. So ED and then, so the Kegel. So yeah, men can do Kegels. You can do them on Zooms. You can sit them on the couch. You can do them wherever you want. You don't need to go to a gym. And it's the single, the last one is prostate health. It helps with the health of your prostate because you're actually putting and exercising energy into that part of a man's body. So a lot of it's genetics. A lot of people say, oh, you need to be ejaculating 21 times a day 21 times a month as a 60-year-old man in order to alleviate prostate health. And I'm like, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if that's causal, but that's what a lot of urologists say.
Pretty busy.
It's a lot especially for an older guy and releasing that much life force. It's problematic to me. But exercising that part of your body as a man, I think men store a lot of stuff there, right? Like we're like these tough, machismo characters, and then you have this area of the body that doesn't get a lot of love all the time, and so just exercising it and putting energy into that spot, I think, helps a lot with that. So learning the sexual dynamics helps with the physiological issues that men might have. So they go hand in hand. And then there's obviously some things that you would learn that have nothing to do with the physiological part. But if you learn all these skills and you don't, you can learn whatever you want, but if it doesn't work properly, then it's not going to be that effective. So
when I hear skills, I think a lot of guys might be thinking, I got to learn moves. I got to learn the moves. It's, I got to become stronger to support my partner. I got to have the mobility, the finesse. Is that what we're talking about? Or when you say sexual dynamics, is it, even a step beyond?
It's definitely part of it, right? There's the act, right? Which everyone sort of thinks about. Guys mostly go to like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Where am I putting your leg? Where am I putting my body? How can I,
what's the position?
Exactly. So what I really encourage men is to think of this experience much more broadly and much more holistically. And we start way back into like, let's actually learn about your body, right? So you think about sex ed in school. It's really not healthy connection to our sexual energy. Like, what is the sexual energy? What is that life force, right? And then it's about understanding the female, right? In a heteronormative, situation, understanding female body and dynamics and erogenous zones and, how to approach and all that sort of stuff. Then it's moving into, before that is like connecting with a partner, right? How does that actually, work? Like texting, communicating, consent, right?
Connection beyond the physical.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Just connecting in that regard. And like, what are you doing here, right? Sex is a spiritual experience. You're literally inside of a woman. Like you are connected on a very, very, very deep level. So whether you want to recognize or acknowledge that or not, it's intense. It's a beautiful thing. And then you get into the pre, which is more of like the foreplay of like understanding, okay, well, women's bodies are different. It takes women a lot longer to achieve orgasm than it does a man. And women need to be stimulated in a variety of different ways that men don't necessarily need to be. So it's about sharing that information, and it gets into, foreplay, erogenous zones, different ways of connecting. What's the flow of where you should be focusing your energy to unlock certain parts of her, right, and allow her to surrender and feel safe and comfortable in those experiences, because that's really the most important thing as men that we can do. Then you get into the act and you the moves and things like that, and then there's the aftercare, right, after the act. So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go and do my thing. It's like, if you want to be really proficient and have like a very, very, strong skill set in this area, it's understanding, well, how am I after? How do we communicate after physically, verbally? What kind of communication does a woman need, right? And I tell guys, I'm like, this woman is allowing you to be inside of her, right? Think about that. It's a really powerful thing. We as men don't have that experience.
Yeah.
Ever. Heterosexual men don't ever experience that. And so I'm like, think about what that might feel like, and then put yourself in her shoes. And then, usually guys are like, oh, it's a simple, It's a simple little like, oh, wait a minute. Like I do,
Yeah.
let me think about this a little bit,
Exactly.
more deeply. And so when we get into, so it's not just the act, it's starting with you and then other, and then connected as partners. And then how do you go through that experience? So it's pretty robust. It's a robust platform.
Take us back to before we ever get into the foreplay, which I think is where I used to go, and I think a lot of guys might still.
Yeah.
To become more sexually dynamic, to get these skill sets, you think, again, the moves, but also it's focusing on your partner.
Yeah.
I love how you brought up, you got to start with you. You got to know your body. You got to have confidence in your body. You got to be able to know, love, trust, touch, feel, appreciate, respect your own body. I'm kind of adding on words here to
No, this is perfect.
Can you kind of walk the guy through what does that look like? What are some practices we can develop, and really why that's so important and how it directly translates into the next step, getting to do that with your partner?
Exactly. What I have learned is that most men don't have a healthy connection to their own sexual energy. The vast majority of that is because of porn. So most men have watched porn, many are addicted to porn, many watch much more than they should. And when you do that, you're actually creating dopamine pathways, right? The dopamine reward response of like, how do I get pleasure, right? And so if porn is this sort of hardcore visceral nature of like, well, this is how I'm going to get pleasure, this is how I'm going to get sexual intimacy, so to speak.
I'm going to get aroused.
Right, I'm going to get aroused. Then you're sort of training yourself in a way that isn't necessarily the most healthy, because A, it's teaching you all the wrong moves, and B, it's training your brain. It actually causes neuroplastic changes in your brain. Video watching, hardcore video watching changes that structure so that when you're with a partner, you get a lot of ED because you're not actually connected. So what I say is if men can develop a healthy connection, understanding to their own sexual energy, then they're going to be able to have that when they're with a partner. If you have an unhealthy connection to yourself, you're masturbating to porn a lot, you're addicted to sort of all that sort of stuff, right? That's not really helping you with real interpersonal dynamics. It's going to be more challenging for you to be able to translate that into a healthy, loving connection, partnership, and sexual relationship with a person. So we start there. We start with also understanding like your semen creates life. Right. And so, I talk about edging a lot and everyone's like, oh, what's edgy? This has been around for a long time. This isn't something, that I made up. This has been around as a practice of, if you understand that your ejaculate creates a life, right? That's how powerful and potent it is. When you're self-pleasuring or whatever it may be, you're actually creating the movement of fluid in your body, right? And men understand that. But you're also creating energy, right? That happens with the moving in towards more of like the climax of the experience, right? You create energy. Guys are like, oh, but what about blue balls? Well, that's because you've moved fluid, but you've also created energy, and the energy becomes stagnant because you don't necessarily know how to move it up your system. So a lot of the stuff that I teach at the first level is like, I teach about edging. I teach about how do you move that energy that you've cultivated up so that you won't move it out, right? So if that energy creates life and you don't release it, and you're putting that energy up inside you, it's powerful. It's a little bit esoteric. It's a little bit woo-woo.
This was all new to me when I dove into last year, I guess 2 years ago, The Way of the Superior Man.
Yeah.
This whole concept, I rewound this section, what you're talking about, probably 5 times. It's really wild stuff, but if you think about it and apply it, very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And very doable.
Oh, yeah. And I say to guys, you know how you feel after you come, I was like, think about how you feel, how you are with yourself, how you are as in relationship to the person that you were just intimate with.
Yeah.
It just shifts. There's a shift. You're usually less connected, usually more satiated, usually don't want to be as, in the moment with them, right? Your mind goes off to other things. It's because hormones are released in your body that are causing you to be like low libido, low arousal, low, you're not going to be really engaged in that experience anymore. So I say, well, what if you could do something that allowed you to feel powerful even throughout that? Maybe you forego this little tiny like orgasm moment, right? But you get high. And that's what I talk about. I'm like, you can get high from doing the practices that I share. You know, you can get high. And so like David Data, Montauk Chi, all these masters, they've been talking about this stuff for a long time. It's just about bringing it into the level of like the masses, where it's like, hey guys, you know, if you don't like the way you feel after this, or you want to be a more powerful person in the world, why don't fighters come before fights, right? So I try to create these metaphors. Guys understand fighting. They're like, oh, because they want to be full of their juice. Well, why wouldn't you want that for most of your life? Like, you know, every day isn't a battle, but you have to sort of extrapolate down, you know, big meetings, whatever it is that you're doing. And it's just like that conservation of life force. So actually, it was funny. I don't know if this is true or not, but someone said that, you know, Mike Tyson would, when his prime, he actually would come, because if he didn't, he would actually kill the guy. So he wanted to be less powerful, right? So hopefully, you know, I don't know what he's going to do with this fight with the Paul guy, but so it's getting in touch with yourself. It's learning edging practice. It's learning Kegels, right? It's learning about how your system works so that you can be the most optimal. It's about mastering yourself, right? As men, we love to master things. We love to have control over what it is that we're doing. And in the sexual realm, we often give our energy away to porn and masturbation, which I think is just sort of a waste of energy. And we give our energy away to, I mean, whether it's dating apps or whatever it is, like we want to cultivate more and bring that energy in so that we can be more powerful. When I do these practices, you know, if I'm going out or something like that, and I'll do a self-pleasure and I'll edge, right? And I won't actually release before I'm going out into the world, I'm more powerful. I can feel it, because my energy is there and I'm confident. And then the energy that I get attracting back to me, oftentimes from women, they can feel it too, because you've cultivated this field almost, right? Whereas, you know, if you do the opposite, you don't attract that same energy. And so I'm like, hey guys, you know, let's get in touch with yourself, understand your own life force energy, understand how powerful that is. Understand that like that energy, at least in the Taoist philosophies that I've studied, that energy isn't infinite. Right. And so when you're dissipating it all the time, you're sort of just like that power bar is going down. So that's the philosophy of more of the Taoist, which is a Chinese philosophy of living, is that, you know, this energy that we're creating, it's they call it immortality. It's really just like living as long as you can, as healthy as you can, as powerfully as you can. Right. Obviously immortality it's more of a metaphor, but if you're able to cultivate more of that as a man, then you will live more powerfully, because that juice basically is feeding you, right? That energy that you create is feeding you. So that's what we start out with. And it's, you know, for a lot of guys, it can be like a real shift, you know, of like understanding of the way that they look at their sexuality, right? Because a lot of the guys have never necessarily heard about stuff like this before. And so, you know, we have great conversations and guys are like, huh. And all I want to hear is that like, oh, that's it.
Exactly.
And just like get the wheels turning in a different direction.
To begin to think differently. I have to imagine, because I've been there, some guys might be listening and going, I'm uncomfortable. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel allowed to do any of this outside of sex with my partner. Probably old school religion of I'm not allowed to do this without my spouse. I know I've been there. The thought of doing any of this stuff with myself, to myself, felt forbidden and wrong and shameful. How would you talk to a guy to kind of go through that hurdle first, to then get into what we just talked about?
It's interesting. I got a similar feedback after another interview that I did from someone that had listened. And so I didn't grow up with sort of the religion and the suppression of the sexuality when I was younger. So I don't have personal experience with that. But what I can say is, you know, sexuality is your birthright, right? And like, that's why we're all here, right? And so if you're able to acknowledge that, you know, what religion plays, or what your parents or your society, whatever it may be, we're moving into a new realm, right? Of sexual open-mindedness. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on in culture and society. But I would say is, if you think about, you know, what are you doing with yourself, right? And then what are you doing with your partner? And then maybe just communicating that with your partner, or being like, hey, these are some things that I want to practice and I want to try. A, are you comfortable with that? B, would you like to try it with me, right? Because when I talk about edging with guys, I always say you should try doing it first by yourself, because it's going to be a lot easier for you to, you know, it's going to be a lot easier for you to learn how to do it by yourself, because it's a simple practice, but it's really hard, because if a man is on the brink of release, the most difficult thing in the world for a man to do is actually to actively choose to not release. And when you're with a partner, it gets a lot more complicated. So I say start on yourself first. But I would say, look, if you're not ready to move into these things, it's okay. But I would say, like, I would encourage you, and I like to push people to their edges a little bit. And I would say, like, look, take an opportunity to see what this might do for you, right? Have an open, candid conversation with your partner. And if that's something that you guys are comfortable with, give it a shot. Doing Kegels and things like that, like, that's just for your own body. Everyone should be able to do that. Because again, it's just, it's like you going to the gym, but you're just going to a gym for the different part of your system.
So you think by us talking to our partner more about it, it is going to help us work through any potential shame around doing that with ourselves, to ourselves?
I think partners, and also if there's, shame, obviously getting into some sort of therapy around, where does that come from? Talking and communication, in my understanding, is the most important thing for any type of positive and healthy sexual dynamic. Communicating your desires, your preferences, your fears. We don't communicate a lot in our culture about our desires, our fears, our kinks, our fetishes, whatever it may be.
We probably lie to ourselves the most.
Oh, for sure, right? Because there's a lot of like, if I do this, then I'm X.
Exactly.
The reality is, like, that doesn't exist in my world. Like, you can be into whatever you want to be into. Own it, right? As long as you're not harming anyone else, right? Own it, and then cultivate a practice around it, right? And then find people or find a partner, whatever it may be, that are actually like into the things that you're into. Because I think a lot of times in our sexual dynamic, sexual relationships with partners, one partner's into A, the other partner's into B. They never communicate those desires, and they're sort of just like walking through this maze together, but they never really connect in that way. It's like, what are you into, right? Because it's like, a woman's into this, and so people are going to think this way about her. We can be into all sorts of things. Sexuality is where we actually get to explore. And I think that most people in their lifetime, they sort of scratch the surface of what their sexual, energy can create. Maybe like 5% of what's possible. So it's a very small area that where most people are focused in. You talk about BDSM and kink and fetishes and whatnot, and that's not for everybody. But there's things to explore that really turn people on. So it's like, why can't we? I've got a client that I'm working with, and so it's about he's having this issue with who he is in the world, and then who he wants to be when he's with an intimate partner, and they're kind of diametrically opposed. And I'm like, well, what if you could just own both of those, right? And find the space and find the right person, to have that experience with. As
kind of, for lack of a better term, split identity, dual
exactly,
identity. Like I really fully, strongly aligned with this role and dynamic and personality in this scene, but then in this scene, it's another.
Exactly. So owning both of them and realizing that you can be multiple personalities or multiple identities in the same body, and just in different scenarios. Because again, I think the religion came in and it was like, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't be practicing this, or I shouldn't feel this way. And it's bad to feel this way, and it's bad to feel pleasure from feeling this way. I think, I don't know, like Osho, he talks about like, you have to love your lust and your greed and your joy and your pleasure and your pain, and you have to love all of it, right? And this sort of like unity consciousness component, like you're all of those things. And if you start saying like, this part of me is bad, well, that's not going to be helpful to anybody, because it's not bad.
Especially not yourself.
It's just, exactly. And then you're just sort of self-shaming, self-sabotaging, owning it and saying, hey, this is okay. And you're going to have to break through some of the stuff that's kept you back, in those scenarios.
You brought up where I think a lot of people might assume topics like this would go, BDSM, kink, just kind of the other end of the spectrum of just, I hate to say wild, but very different sexual dynamics and practices and things people are into. People, I think, in order to expand on their sexual dynamics, should push the edge a little bit, but they don't need to go that full in. Maybe that's you down the road. No. So how would you kind of walk somebody through, what does it take? What does it look like just to explore? Like, I don't know what I'm into. I don't think I'm into anything, or I don't know what my edge is, but I don't want to do that, at least not right now. Right. How do we kind of safely and incrementally push our sexual dynamic edge?
Yeah. So it's interesting because in my programs and stuff, I don't really talk about much of that stuff at all. I'm starting at like, let's start at the basics, right? But what I know is that, there's if you Googled like top 50 things in fetishes and kinks, you'd have a list, right? And it's even as simple as going into that, search, looking at that stuff, talking about it with a partner and being like, are you into that? Yes, no, maybe, right? At its simplest level, that's what we can do, right?
Wow,
I like this, or like, that's a maybe, or that's a hard no.
Didn't even know what that is, but I'm interested.
Exactly. Then you have to Google it. It's like, okay, got it. Interesting. No. But it's as simple as that. And then being with someone, you basically have to set the stage. You don't do it while you're in the intimate act. You do it beforehand. It's like, oh, cool. Let's have an afternoon where we look at this stuff and like we explore it. And then you go and say, okay, which ones are the ones that are aligned, right? And if none of them are aligned, that's okay. But if some of them are, maybe you go and explore that together. And it's always about communication. It's about creating a safe environment, right? It's about having, safe words that you use, especially if you're getting into, pain type things or whatever people are into.
Be safe, everybody.
Safe, consensual, always. But again, it's the communication, and it's an open mind and non-judgmental space. That's the most important thing. Because with sex and sexuality, we especially men, it's such a vulnerable area for us. And so if we ever feel like we're being attacked or judged or this or that, generally speaking, we shell up. I think as men, it's very hard for us to receive feedback in that area of our lives. So I always say, like, communicate, especially as women, communicate to men with compassion, with love, with a lot of ego stroking if that's what's needed to make the guy feel safe and comfortable that you're on the same team. Right. That's something that's really important that I've seen, is that the way we communicate with each other is often more important than what's actually being communicated. Right. If you feel like you are held in a space, because men need to feel that way, especially as it relates to sex.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would say that's probably the most important thing,
You talk to a lot of guys, you work with a lot of guys, and I'm assuming this has to come up. I'm trying some things out. I'm pushing my sexual dynamic edge with myself, for myself. And now I'm doing it with and for my partner. My partner isn't as on board as I am. How do we help our partner get to more of the open mind aspect before we try to convince them or strong arm them or sway them to just get on board because this is what I want? How do we first go to open mind and then see where we can really get on board together?
Yeah. It really depends on your dynamic, right? It depends on who, as people are in partnerships, right? And as you age and as you grow, one partner can sometimes move in a direction of like, hey, I'm on a real growth path. And the other partner may be like, hey, I'm not on that path. And then you sort of have this like divergence, right? Sometimes that leads to divorce, right? Sometimes that leads to like partners not being connected anymore. It's the same thing with the sexual dynamics and growth, right? And it's about communicating like, hey, I want to try this, or hey, this is something great. What I always say is start communicating the things that you like about the partner that they do really well. Right. And
excellent.
You move into like, and I'd also like, I would love to try this, or slowly bring in something that you've been learning into your practice and see if it flows and how it hits, right. And how it matches. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But I always say if one partner is really open and the other partner is not, that partnership may not last, just because if one partner is going in a different direction and really wants to explore this stuff, the other partner needs to at least be open-minded to like, okay, cool. And if that's not the case, then you're going to either deal with it and you won't be.
Right.
But having that like fun and doing it in fun ways where it's like, we're doing this together. Right. This is
not like one person telling the other person what to do because I said it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, I want to do this, or like, I want you to do this. It's more like, these are things that I really love. Can we try this? Right. It's about bringing the person into the experience. And again, with sex and whatnot, there's usually a lot of trauma that happens when we're younger sometimes, or we are not afraid to use our voice, or we're, shameful because of whatever it may be. There's a lot that goes into, the trauma as we grow up and how it affects us sexually. And so just being super understanding and super compassionate as a partner of like, this may never work. My partner may never shift from where they are. And I need to be okay with that. But you got to shoot your shot, which is like, hey, I'd love to explore this with you because, whatever it may be. And then trying that. But again, communication, consent, compassion is really big. And bringing it into the fold of like, I want to do this with you. I want to experience this with you and elevating yourself together.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What about, I hear this from a lot of long-term relationship couples. You begin to dive more into sexual dynamics. You begin to push the edges sexually because you're not having as much sex or you don't feel that same kind of sexual connection, energy. What would you recommend as a way for someone to go down that path?
One of the things that happens with long-term relationships is the level of familiarity with each other increases, which can sometimes have a negative correlation to the level of, arousal that's stimulated. So it's about creating time. And again, this is what a lot of my friends who have been in long-term relationships, like 10 years, 8 years, things like that. I don't have personal experience with that, just FYI, is that you're setting specific time where all you're doing is connecting with each other and there's nothing else going on, where it's date night, this night, and we're doing this. And it's also about like creating, I always say like having two bathrooms, right? Where it's like the stuff that you're doing in the mundane parts of life.
That works, my friend.
Right? It's like, let's separate that as much as we can so that there's a bit of novelty, right? When your partner is getting, dressed to go out for the evening and you come together. Those are some little things, right? Like the less familiar you become with each other, which is super hard. You're living together, you're sleeping in the same bed, you may have children together, right? And things just sort of have this, routine. I think, the relationships and the sexual relationships, they take a lot of work. It takes a lot of work in order to keep them exciting, right? Men and women have different cycles during the day that they're most turned on, most men and women work all day and they come home at night. And like, that's not really the most optimal time for a guy to be intimate because he's exhausted and his testosterone levels are the lowest throughout the day. So it's about finding ways to keep the creativity, to keep the connection, to try and explore. You sort of have to have a growth-oriented mindset, right? Relationships are work. The sexual part of the relationships are also a lot of work, getting into practices where, there's, maybe there's massage, right? Where you guys are focusing on that. And it's just like physical touch, right?
Being physical, but not necessarily yet sexual.
Exactly, right? But where you're just connecting with your partner. So there's lots of things to explore. And it's just about like trying new things and being open-minded, as with any parts of your relationship. But with the sex part, creating time away from your children, making sure you have vacation, and these are simple things. Everybody knows this stuff, but do you make time for it? Because then, what I hear is that like, oh, you get married, you have less and less and less and less sex. And it's just like, okay, does it always have to be that way? Because I know a lot of married couples who have more sex, but because they're putting an emphasis, right? Where does the hierarchy of needs in your relationship and where does the sexual energy and the sexual relationship fall? So if the sexual relationship falls to the bottom of the hierarchy, you're not gonna be as stimulated in that area. But if it's more at the top of that pyramid of what we both need with each other, then you make time for it, So there's no sort of like silver bullet answer, but it's where are you putting your energy, right? If your attention goes there, I guarantee that you're going to at least have more, conversations and more experiences together because you both are focused on it,
What's the phrase? Where your focus goes, energy flows.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I'd love to bring it back. Let's bring it back to the guy now.
Yeah.
Libido, I think, is probably the word that comes to mind for most guys when we're talking about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How do I maintain it as I get older? How do I increase it, even if I am, in my 20s still or 30s, 40s, 50s plus? How would you kind of define libido? And what is the current relationship you think most men have to their libido?
Yeah. I would say, libido is the feeling and sensation that you have. Really, it's sort of like, it's almost like the zest that you have for life. Because I think that the more turned on you are with your own life, the more turned on you are in those sexual and intimate experiences. And you may be more interested and more outgoing and whatever it may be. And so if you are following your purpose, following your passion, you're healthy, you're working out, you're in your body, right? You're physically fit, you're mobile. You're not super stressed, right? Because stress is huge libido killer. All of that stuff in your life is going to create this energy, right? And also like the physiological piece, the testosterone. If your T is low, you're not going to have that arousal, that zest, So it's about keeping everything as elevated as we can. Mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, right? And like not having super stress at work. To me, it's the feeling and sensation that we have in our lives. And then that translates into what it is that we're doing and sexually in order to, maintain. I'm not engaging the way that I did when I was 20. But keeping, it's the health piece is a huge component of it. It's making sure you get your markers tested and you know where your T levels are at. It's about taking herbs and food and supplements that are going to be helpful for you as you get older. And whether we want it or not, some guys are like, oh, I don't want to take any, supplements. I'm like, you don't have to, but like herbs are like food. So it's kind of like eating. It's just a more concentrated dose of like, boom. Taking herbs that are going to help with circulation, with blood flow and things like that, are going to help and support healthy libido. And being in an environment where, you're turned on with your life. If you're doing something you don't love doing, you're depressed, you have this Monday, whatever, it's hard to have that libido because again, it's that zest.
If you can't turn on yourself, how can you expect anybody else to?
Yeah.
If your life and if what you're doing, not to say everybody's situation is the same, but if you are not at least actively in pursuit of developing, honing, optimizing, and loving your life, I mean, bro, start there.
Yeah.
How can you expect anybody else to get on board if you can't?
Exactly. So that when people say libido, most people think of it as sex, but like it's also just like, what is your drive for life, right? And there's the physiological, the mental, the spiritual, all of it goes together. And here we are. So yeah, does libido have the potential to go down as you get older? Yeah. But also you're probably a lot busier doing a lot of other things, like you're building businesses or you're working or you're building a family. But there's ways, cultivating it is key, and it's like, what am I doing every day to make sure that I'm the highest vibration possible, right? I'm the highest version of myself, and everyone is different. Everyone has a different situation and not everyone's, running their own business. Some people are employees, employers, whatever it may be. But, it's an important part of our lifestyle and it's a mix of physiological as well.
If you could give us one super obvious libido killer that you still just see running rampant in most men, and what would be something to remedy that? And what is maybe one that you think is maybe the silent libido killer that most guys might not be aware of at all or completely downplay too much?
So I'll throw one out there that's kind of interesting, but like porn is a really tough one, right? It's not necessarily
you say as a libido killer.
Yeah, because if a guy's watching porn and he's masturbating a lot and he's releasing and releasing and releasing, he's getting tons of prolactin in his system. And his prolactin is the hormone that women, both men and women have it, but women release it when they're breastfeeding. So the baby becomes satiated and content and happy and relaxed. But men also release it after they ejaculate. And so if you're watching a bunch of porn and you're ejaculating all day long, you're going to be, generally speaking, less full of libido. So prolactin in your body cuts libido. It makes you satiated, content, and happy. That to me is one of the biggest ones. And it's something, and it's definitely silent because you hit on it. Actually, I talked about this in one of my posts, but nobody knows if you're addicted to porn except you,
right? Yeah,
and your search history and Google knows if you're addicted to porn, but it doesn't show up like other addictions. It doesn't show up like a gambling addiction, a drug addiction, a heroin addiction, a pharmaceutical drug addiction, because the only things that are like your search history, and usually women know by the way that you have sex with them. That's how someone knows if you're addicted to porn. But it's causing a host of other issues with men, right? It's causing sexual dysfunction. It's causing performance anxiety. It's causing premature ejaculation. It's causing all this stuff that happens. And men don't necessarily recognize it. They don't know how powerful porn is in a negative way for their bodies. But it also, you could be doing it a couple times a day. But I would argue, what would your libido and your zest for life be like if you didn't do that? Right? That's sort of the question, right? So yeah, I have enough energy. I can do it 3 times and I'm still going. But what if you channeled that energy into something else? You know,
if nothing else, you took that time. I mean, you took that time and applied it to
go do something else, do a
communicating
hobby
with your partner.
Exactly, right? Like go start a new craft or go start a new exercise, whatever it may be. So I would say, you know, because that's one of the biggest things that I'm pushing and I'm encouraging men is to rethink their relationship with porn. Because I've seen just so many issues where it's so detrimental to their health. And to the way that they think about themselves, creates depression. It's a whole host of stuff that happens. So that's my answer.
And then what about, you think, was that the silent one or the more obvious one?
No, that's the silent one. The more obvious one, I would say, is...
and an obvious one that guys might kind of know or we hear about, but you really want to remind them, hey, actually, no, don't let this go unchecked any longer.
Yeah. So... bringing it back to testosterone and things like that, the environmental factors that I think are the most important that men can avoid. Number one is eating food that is sprayed with chemicals. So like non-organic food, essentially. Atrazine is a major pesticide that's sprayed on all non-organic crops. And it's basically like directly correlated to massive amounts of phytoestrogen in your system. Again, phytoestrogen creates more estrogen in your body, it acts like estrogen in your body and it caps your T. Your T and your libido are directly correlated. If you have low T, you're not going to have a lot of libido. If you have higher T, you're going to have more libido. So I would say what you're putting in your body, what you're putting on your body, surfactants and soaps and things like that, like making sure that there aren't a lot of chemicals in those, and plastics. You know, there's a whole list of like, they're called estrogenic or endocrine disrupting factors. Microplastics is huge. So avoid plastic wherever you can. It's like simple, like avoid plastics, use steel or stainless steel or glass, eat organic food, you know, eat wild caught fish, no corn, no soy, no grain, like that sort of stuff that, you know, again, it takes time, effort, and maybe more money, but you invest in yourself on the front end so you don't have these issues as you get older, right? Because you have to think about it, like all of these chemicals and pesticides in our system, they started, you know, 50, 60 years ago, and then you're seeing testosterone levels drop, you know, over the last 40 years. Well, I wonder why, right? It's correlative. No one will say what it is because they're like, oh, it's not causal. But you have to just think, you know, critically about it, right? So you have plastics, you have, you know, things in like even sunscreen, like food products, like what is in our water that we're drinking, right? And it's death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not just like, you know, it takes time for these things to happen and affect your body. So food you eat, avoiding plastics, and then, you know, no porn.
You brought up testosterone, and I think that's where most guys think libido comes from. There absolutely is correlation, dare I even say causation. Low T, most likely going to have low libido. High T, most likely going to have high libido. Yeah. What about some other biomarkers we should be looking at that aren't as obvious as testosterone to help with sexual dynamics, but damn sure just libido in general?
Right. The one that I look at is, excuse me, free T, right? Everyone looks at total T. If your free T isn't 2% of your total T, you're technically not in an optimal state, right? And so,
you might have it, but your body doesn't have enough free to actually use and apply.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the vast majority, 98% of our 98% of our testosterone is bound either to albumin or to sex hormone binding globulin, which is SHBG. SHBG, you cannot, if you have high SHBG, you cannot use the testosterone that's attached to that ever. You can use the one that's attached to the albumin. So if you lower your SHBG, which means that more of it's going to be attached to the albumin, then you can use more of it, and your free T will be 2% of your total T. So to make it really simple, your free T should be 2% of total T. If it's not, you should lower your SHBG, right?
How can we do that?
It's tough. It's challenging, right? One is like getting in shape, right? But even if you are in shape, people have used, I think, products like, DIM and other things like that. It's not necessarily like proven. If it was proven like this lowers SHBG, everyone would be taking it.
I've definitely heard DIM helps with testosterone.
Yeah.
But you're saying not necessarily sex binding.
Well, no. Well, so it helps with testosterone because it's affecting SHBG. So it's lower down the chain.
Okay.
But another one is, DHEA, right? And DHEA levels should be, at the upper 25 percentile of the reference range. And so if they're not, then you have to look, because DHEA is, again, the precursor to the steroid, the sex hormones. So DHEA and pregnenolone play a huge role in creating optimal sexual health. So, and there's like a map I can share with you about how it all works. Essentially, it's somewhat complicated, but DHEA is a hormone, pregnenolone is a hormone. Men can take those and play with their levels of pregnenolone and DHEA, because that's going to affect how the steroid hormones are created, right?
Okay.
And how much testosterone you may have. So those are two other markers that I would say. And I actually have a guide, and I can send it to all your readers, whatever you want to do. So I basically put a guide together of the 10 most important male blood markers and how they affect your body, right? Because it's not, so everyone looks at T, because T is like the final gate, but you have to go upstream, right?
Yeah.
And so upstream is like DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, understanding DHT, right? Which a lot of guys, DHT is interesting because it's like, if you have a lot of it, you don't have a lot of hair, but you could have more T. And they stopped giving it out to people because it created some other issues. But it's
like
complicated.
PSH, luteinizing hormone, all these things. There are so many other, and I only know this because I've gone through the last couple of years, like really comprehensive labs. Quarterly now, and my wife is a FNP, works in hormone health and optimization.
Oh, it's amazing.
All I hear all day long in the background is luteinizing hormone, PSA, sex binding T. Guys might get really the wind knocked out of their sails because you think you're doing something to support that.
Right.
And then you are. I mean, don't downplay that. But also, you might just be fighting the wrong battle.
Exactly. You don't want to go directly at the T. You want to go at the things that affect the T, right? Cholesterol, right? That's a big one. That cholesterol
huge for testosterone.
Creates your steroid hormones. Cholesterol, DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, starting at the hormone level, and then working with those and adjusting those, and then that's going to affect your T. So don't go for the T. Oh, what's going to raise my T? Well, DHEA and pregnenolone relationship will help fix your T, but you're going to have to do some blood work and figure out where you sit. And then you're going to have to do some blood work in 4 months or 5 months after you've put some, maybe you start taking DHEA, micronized DHEA, or micronized pregnenolone. The other big one for guys is PSA, prostate specific antigen. So PSA is the indication of whether you have prostate cancer or not, and you want that as close to 0 as possible. And that's all in the guide. And but it's important to share that there's other things that we as men need to be looking at. We're not as complicated as women as it relates to sexual health, but we're definitely more complicated than just the one-dimensional T. Right? I mean, most guys don't even know about free T. Right? I'm like, well, so you could have 1,100 testosterone. That's cool, but if you have 0.5% available free testosterone, you're not going to be able to use much of it. So it's just sort of sitting there and it's bound, But yeah, it's and it gets complex. It's a little bit more complex than we think.
So can you walk us through maybe some medications you're familiar with, some supplementation, some herbs, some things that we can maybe incorporating into our daily wellness habits to support all the things that support T?
Yeah. So, every region of the world has their own herbs that help with male sexual health and function. So the area that I focus most on is Chinese herbs. It's been around for 3,000 years. It's the oldest system of medicine in the world. It's pretty incredible. The herbs that are there that we really utilize are cistanche is a big one. It's CISTANCHE. Cistanche is like the male powerhouse super herb for male sexual function. It helps with nitric oxide production. What I try to share with guys is like these herbs, they work on the organ systems of your body. They help the root causes. They're solution oriented. They're not Band-Aids. So the way that I look at pharmaceuticals versus herbal medicine is that herbs are like, they're actually treating the root cause of what's going on. They help your organ function. They're helping with your body systems because they're really intelligent. They're powerful. They're plants, right? They're coming from Mother Nature.
Immunomodulators, many of them.
Yeah. And so they're doing a lot of things that, maybe pharmaceutical companies are, talking about, but they're doing them on an internal level. there's Tongkat Ali, there's Fadoja. Tongkat Ali is from, Malaysia and the Philippines. Fadoja is African. Mucuna is from South America. So each area of the world has their own sort of super herb, right? Jamaica's got some, the Caribbean has some. It's pretty wild. So I would say, find something that you align with, right? That makes sense for you, right? Make sure it's really healthy and quality. The way that we do it with Chinese herbs is that there's always a blend, right? You don't just buy Sustanche, right? Because it could be caustic to your system, right? These herbs are powerful. So you want something that has a number of different herbs in it that round it out, that focus on other things, that can lead it into the right areas, and always better in a blend, right? Because it's a holistic formula. So that's what I always recommend. Sometimes with single herbs, it can get intense on your system. Sometimes like taking Tonka can cause like your urethra to I guess get irritated. In some cases that happens. Not for everybody. Yeah. Like if people take it, it's fine. But like you just want to be mindful of like the dose you're doing, and always cycling. Right. My programs and protocols it's about cycling.
Why is cycling important?
You don't want your body to get too used to anything, but also you want to give your body time to absorb it without having to feed it new stuff. So I focus on programs that are like, you take this product month 1, you take the next product month 2, you get off of that product, you get onto a different product because of the way that these herbs are supposed to work with your system. Some herbs you're not supposed to take all the time, right? Some herbs you can take all the time. So it just depends. You want to, it's a little bit more complicated than just like, take this forever for the rest of your life.
I like that just from the perspective also of, you really get an opportunity to get to know your body.
Yeah.
If you do, anything, I think for 30 days, broadly speaking here, most things especially like a supplement or a whole food you introduce to your diet, after 30 days, you should either be at a saturation point or have familiarity with it enough to know other variables that are saying the same. And you can go like, yes, I feel it. No, I don't. Yeah. And, or it's really directly influencing a biomarker. I love that you bring up cycling because then you get the opportunity to really understand your baseline.
Yeah, exactly.
You get to understand, I might not have, I didn't think that I felt it as much when I was on it, but I damn sure notice it when I'm off.
Yeah, exactly.
Some things, especially when it comes to supplementation and nutrition, you notice it more when you're not taking it, which then makes you know, that's what it felt like.
Exactly. No, that's actually a really brilliant point. The off period is important. And what I also say is, with herbs, we live in a culture where it's like, we want something fast and easy and right now. And, a lot of guys are like, I've taken it for 10 days. I don't feel anything. I'm like, hey bro, like this is food. Like you eat chicken for 10 days. Do you feel something? No, but like, you got to just be a little bit more patient. Right. So the pharmaceutical, it's faster and it's immediate. Is it actually healing what's going on underneath, or is it giving you some sort of like outsized gain that's like quick and immediate? It's like, you feel it. I always say like people look at the herbal route or the natural route as like a longer approach. Maybe it is, but if you get on a pharmaceutical to like alleviate something, what's most often going to happen is that's going to cause a host of other issues that you're going to have to fix. And so it's a much longer path ultimately than if you just started more of a natural approach. My philosophy is like as natural as possible for as long as possible. I understand that people have to do certain things, that pharmaceutical drugs are important for specific areas of their life. But when it comes to like treating root causes of more like autoimmune type diseases or, lack of circulation, stuff like that, I always say like start with a natural approach because your body is very intelligent. And the plants are also really intelligent, the herbs that we're using. And when they're done properly with the right formulations, blends, and prepared in the right way, they have the capacity to work with your body. Think about how intelligent our bodies are. I mean, we can fight off anything. It's amazing. Yeah. So let's utilize that, right? Instead of, you give it a pharmaceutical, maybe you feel better in the moment, but what are the long-term effects of that? We sort of don't look months out, right? We're like, okay, I just want to fix something right away. So I understand both, and I understand a lot of people have different perspectives on this, but this is just my personal opinion. But yeah, I mean, taking these different herbs is really important, for men as we get older, especially helps with libido and testosterone function, other hormone functions.
Manages cortisol, keeps stress in check.
Exactly.
Huge, especially ashwagandha.
Yeah. And so, and then finding what makes sense for you, right? Like which of these products do you align with, right? Which of these products resonate with you, and then giving them a shot, but like give them a shot by themselves for a period of time that makes sense. If you're like, 2 weeks, I'm out. if you're that kind of a guy, don't even bother. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you may feel something, but like also a lot of these products, you have to remember, some of these products have caffeine in them and some of these products have beta alanine in them to give you that rush.
To really make you feel it.
Right. It's BS, right? It's like any product that's like for male libido that has caffeine in it is bullshit because you shouldn't need caffeine in order to like feel your libido, right? It's giving you this like this weird
false positive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. So I say
you're not
like,
boosting libido, you're just stimulating your mind.
yeah, you're on
yourself.
caffeine, which is a stimulant, which is great. But so I say like, give it time, let the herbs work in your system, you know? In Eastern medicine, like a doctor has a lot of patients isn't a good doctor. Right. You go once a year, you get your herbs, you get your checkup, and then you take your herbs in a preventative way, right? Just like eating food every day, you're taking herbs, you're mixing them together. Now, I created this stuff in pills, and other people have other supplement products, but you want to take them, daily because they're really helpful. You know.
What are some of the other effects besides increased libido, increased sexual dynamics that are actually worthwhile considering?
Yeah. So. There's a couple that I didn't mention that are really important actually that are really easy to do, which is one, like getting sunshine. Sunshine is incredibly important. Vitamin D, which is not actually a vitamin, it's a hormone. No one really knows that, but it is literally like one of the most critical things to our overall health, our vibrancy, our mental. We talk about seasonal affective disorder. When you're in a really cold climate, you don't get a lot of sunshine every day, you get into this depressed state. Well, what do you think that's doing to your vitality and your libido?
Right. Yeah.
It's not helping. So sunshine is really key. I would say cold water exposure has been pretty impactful for me, at least, of inflammation response, but also just like, I think it gives you this boost that you wake up. So I don't do caffeine really. I don't do coffee, I should say. I do some pre-workout sometimes, but when I wake up and I'm doing cold therapy, like the day just sort of changes.
Are you saying that's just your personal preference, or are you saying that caffeine can be a libido killer? Or you're finding you get more out of cold water instead of caffeine?
Yeah, no. So I just personally, I never liked the taste of coffee, which people are like, you're crazy. Maybe I am, but that's fine. I've never really ordered a coffee ever in my life. So I didn't like it when I was younger or whatever. And to be honest with you, up until I was about 38 or so, and I started launching this business, I didn't really have pre-workouts. When I would go work out in the morning, I would just go wake up and do my thing. Now, I noticed that like I do like a pre-workout, but it's caffeine that comes from like, I think it's like green tea extract or something. It's a little bit healthier. I don't know much about caffeine in terms of like, I'm not like
I'll just clarify
on the Huberman level.
Yeah.
No, it's more my personal preference. I just don't like it. But yeah, but the cold water, it just invigorates your spirit in a way that nothing really else does, And so I think that helps with inflammation, healthy, just being healthy, getting that state of like optimal health every day. And then going back to your question, so it was about obviously your immune system and your immune function is key to all this stuff. And all these herbs help with that, right? Yeah, they're focusing on blood flow and circulation, but they're working on your organs and your systems of your body. And when that happens, you're going to be more vibrant, you're going to be in a healthier state, right? Anytime, think about when you're sick, the first thing that goes is your vitality and your libido. Interesting, right? So it's like your body doesn't want to put that energy out into the sexual realm because it needs to conserve its energy for healing, right? So all of the stuff that we're doing is about preventative health, right? Yeah. Herbs, lifestyle, avoiding estrogenic factors, healthy, sunshine, cold water therapy, breath work, whatever it may be. All of this stuff, it's about this holistic approach of how can I be the most optimal person I can be? And then you're going to have vitality and therefore hopefully higher levels of T and hopefully higher levels of really everything, right? Energy in your life to go tackle and seize the day.
Do you ever get any feedback from women as to the things that you talk about, the sexual dynamics or sexual health tips and advice and information you put out, and the women are going, how do I get my guy to do this? How do I translate this? The women are on board, but we're missing the mark when it comes to translating for their male partner.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I have learned is that women are much more open-minded and they are receptive to things, especially in the sexual realm, than men are in general. That being said, when they watch the content and they listen to the content, there's a way that they can share this information with men that's going to work, and there's a way that it's not going to work. So I've experienced a I'll start with the way that it doesn't work. The way that it doesn't work is a bunch of women are at a table and they're watching the content, and then there's a guy there and he's either single or in a relationship or whatever it may be, and they're like, hey, you should watch this.
Yeah.
Okay, the guy's gonna be like, who the fuck
Take
is this
notes.
guy? You know? Yeah. And it's like, A, he feels emasculated. B, he doesn't feel like he's being involved in the conversation. He's more just like being told what to do. C, it's just not a place of compassion, right? They mean well, but they don't necessarily know what they're doing, and they don't understand how seeing someone else talk about this stuff may be unnerving to them, right? Again, for men, sexual health and sexual energy is an incredibly vulnerable topic. So that's not a good way to do it. Saying like, hey, you should do this. Yeah. Guy's gonna be like, F that. Yeah. Like, he's gonna shut down. Right. And that's just the way that most men operate. And I don't necessarily blame them. The way that you do it is it's about the compassion. It's about the way that it's communicated. And it's starting off by sharing something that the guy does really well, or the guy does better than, something else. Right. And sharing that information, being like, wow, like this is something that I love that you do, If the guy doesn't do anything well, maybe you have to embellish a little bit. But whatever you got to do,
he's got to do one thing. He's got to have one
exactly.
thing. Yeah.
Whatever you got to do to get there, but share that piece and let that piece sink in.
Yeah.
And let the guy know that you're on the same team, right? Oh, I love when you do this, or oh, we did this and this was great. Let it sit, right? For a day, whatever it may be, a couple days, etc. And then you can slowly bring in other stuff. Because if you share it in a way that's really good, my guess is he'll start watching this stuff on his own without telling you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But if it's this sort of like, you need to do this, or I want you to do this better, and it feels like this sort of like it's you versus me instead of like togetherness,
which is already a hard divider for most male-female relationships.
Sure.
Anytime we hear our partner bark orders on either side, nobody likes that.
100%. Yeah. So it's the what do they call it? Like the shit sandwich. Like it's like like the really positive stuff, and then it's like, okay, and now I'd love to try this.
Areas for improvement.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'd love to do this with you, and could we try this in an effort of like, it's a team dynamic. Let's do this together. Our sexual health is a together thing, right? It takes two to tango. Where you're not just like, it's not one person doing the other thing to the other. We're all responsible for our own sexual health, right? In terms of communicating our desires, our needs, our wants, what we like, what we don't like. So again, it's this teamwork effect. That is how I've seen, because I always ask like, oh, my husband loved this content. I'm like, how did you do it? How did you share it with him? And that's what I get every time. It's like, oh, I shared him the good stuff, and then I focus on the stuff that I want to improve on. And it's like, and knowing that it takes time, and knowing that he may have questions, he may have reservations, he may be confused, he may still feel emasculated, he may still feel vulnerable, and just coming at it with a super, super soft, ultra kind, ultra sensitive approach, that you're in it together, and that you want to do this together, and that you're on the same path together.
Maybe this is just clever marketing and production from shows like Sex and the City, but it seems that women have no problem between their besties talking about their sex life. I don't think guys are really talking sex health, sex life that often or as much as women, as I perceive women to. Why do you think that is? How can we go about maybe initiating that with our guy friends, our trusted, safe guy friends? And what do we have to gain from that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I agree with you completely. Women are much more open to talking about this stuff with each other, because women as a gender are much more open creatures, right? They're the first movers for a lot of this stuff, and they work with an area of compassion, understanding, and there's much less ego. What prohibits men from doing this? Because you're right, men don't have safe spaces to talk about this stuff, which is why I'm getting so many DMs a day from guys that just want to connect and have a space to talk about their sexual health or their dysfunction or not skillful, not as powerful, not capable. All of the things that may come up as it relates to you experiencing some form of sexual dysfunction or lack of awareness or whatever it may be, right? When you're younger, you're sort of taught that, like, kids make fun of you if you like, oh, you're not good at this, or oh, you didn't know how to do that. And then you learn like, oh, well, I can't share this because I'm going to get attacked, or
I'm going to get kicked out of the tribe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kicked off the playground.
So it's about the ego and preservation of the ego as a man in the world. They're like, oh, I am powerful and I am strong and I am all these things. And just because I have some sort of sexual dysfunction, or I'm experiencing, less firm erections, for this period of my life because I'm going through a ton of stress, it doesn't mean that you're not still a man and that you're not still valued and not still worthy. We men have so much value that's tied into our sexual function. And think about, as a man, like, we've got one thing, we've got one area for sexual, pleasure, right? Our members. And imagine if that didn't work as the way that we wanted it to.
Yeah.
What does that do for our psyche? And I've been in and part of it is like, I've been through all of these situations. I've been situations where I have premature ejaculation. I have situations where I have had ED because I've been super stressed or whatever it is. I've had performance anxiety. So like, every guy's had all these things happen to them. Nobody's talking about it. But like, if you can actually embrace it and say, I'm still worthy, and yeah, I'm experiencing this right now, and they're not necessarily correlated or tied. So that's what I've experienced from most guys, is that they don't want to necessarily admit it to their guy friends,
or to themselves first.
Yeah, right.
Even,
or their sons. And I'm saying, like, hey, everyone has had a problem at some point if you're a guy. Like, and if you haven't, like, God, more power to you. But the vast majority of men experience something that takes them out of that, like, oh, I'm in the most powerful state in this area of my life. And this area also, like, controls a lot of decision making, and just controls our behavior, our actions. Like,
way more than just downstairs.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jackson, this has been incredible. I love everything you're up to. It's been great to get to know you the last several months now. I'm going to have everything down in the show notes and video notes for everybody to learn more. Cool. But this show is all about helping people move forward in a unique area of their life to keep living a life ever forward.
Yeah.
What do those words mean to you, man? Ever forward?
It's literally my entire life's philosophy. Growing, improving, adapting, and adjusting, like, in every aspect of your life, forever, until we're not here anymore.
And doing all that with a high libido.
High libido and a healthy eggplant.
Well, thank you so much, man. This has been great.
Thank you.